Work hard and play harder.
And that's just the goal with the Sharp Football Analysis podcast, is to discover and uncover new ways to analyze football, and then share that information and disseminate that material in an easy to understand manner. And then at that point, all you got to do is let the Marshawn Lynch principle take over. Yeah, that is, when we do it so constantly, so frequently, and so repetitively, and so accurately, even those who hate analytics, even the cynics and the skeptics, it just will click in their mind that they're so worn down and frustrated they will have to sit down and listen to reason. And that is the Marshawn Lynch principle. Because like he says,
if you just run through somebody's face, a lot of people ain't gonna be able to take that over and 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 over again. They just not gonna want that.
Think there's a deeper metaphor there?
Run through a face. Then you don't have to worry about them no more.
welcome into the Week 3 edition of the Sharp Football Analysis podcast. My name is Warren Sharp of sharpfootballanalysis.com, and we are joined, as always, by our good friend from rotoworld.com, Evan Silva. You can follow Evan on Twitter at Evan Silva. He is always producing very incredible matchup articles that will come out on Thursdays and cover all the games that we're going to be discussing right now in a lot more detail than probably we're going to get into at the present moment, which we like to highlight a few games. He goes through every single player and every single game that you might be interested in, so it's a definite must-read every single week. Evan, how are you doing Friday night?
Doing well, man. Excited for this Week 3 slate. I don't know. I think that there are a lot of interesting. I feel like I say this every week. There are a lot of interesting games this week. Just really excited to watch some football on Sunday. Get past this Saturday obstacle and get into the football games.
Yeah, exactly. And this will be, one thing I like about this podcast is that, we're recording it late on Friday night. It is going to filter out into the channel on Saturday. So it's going to give people who may like college football in the background, may tune into their favorite team or the big games, but, they want something to fill their void as they're filling out lineups or that sort of thing. On Saturday, this is going to be something new and fresh that they'll be able to digest and dive into. But you're absolutely right. There are a number of interesting games. We've got a number of divisional rivalries. We've got some intrigues going on with like the Minnesota-Carolina game is certainly intriguing, the Denver-Cincinnati game as well. There's a number of teams that you got 0-2 teams heading off against one another. You got some desperate teams who feel like they have to win this game to keep their season alive. So it is a pretty interesting Week 3, and you can actually look across the board. There are very few teams that have spreads that are extremely high. I mean, if you just go down the board, and just so you guys know, you can follow along at the Sharp Football Analysis.com website. That's my website. I have a lines page which refreshes all the Vegas lines and all the offshore lines immediately. You can see the colors change as those lines change. And most of these games are pretty tight, with the exception of the Seattle game, with the exception of the Miami game. Most of these other games are very tight on the spread. So hopefully it's a competitive and interesting game, interesting slate of games. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it.
By the way, man, I mean, everybody should be looking at this page. It's sweet. I could just stare at it and look at all the different numbers. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty cool, because the best part about it, and we talked about the totals in general and how, you can't just go over a game or play guys from a game where the total is high just because it's got a high total. And you guys did the study, and then I built off of that, is you want to be playing on games where you think the scoring outcome could be high. And it doesn't necessarily mean like the overall score in the game. Obviously, that would help too. If you're a team that's trailing, you wouldn't mind if the opponent starts scoring some points, because then your fantasy offensive players are going to try to keep pace. So that's always a good thing. But we've even seen teams where, like Diggs last week, exceeding some expectations there and producing a lot thanks to some injuries and that sort of thing. But it certainly is helpful if you're staring at that screen and you can see the lines move around and you see some totals that are taking some heavy under money, moving through some key numbers and that sort of thing. It might give you a good inclination. Hey, this may not be the exact best game to take a player from. So it is helpful to know not just what the lines were, on Wednesday, but see them in real time, adjusted every second. It is definitely helpful for daily fantasy, as well as obviously for sports betting. With that said, on that screen that you're looking at right there, Denver-Cincinnati, the first game on the board, game 461. a really interesting matchup here. We actually have a team in the Denver Broncos who, of course, is defending Super Bowl champs, and a lot of people thought that this team is going to have a letdown possibly this year, especially with Trevor Siemian taking over duty. Obviously, Peyton Manning didn't have a great season last year, but Trevor Siemian coming in with very little experience and has led this team, in part to a great defense, of course, but has led this team to 2 victories. Now they go for their first road game, and they take on a Cincinnati Bengals team who is playing in their first home game and who has played 2 very good defenses to start the year. They played at the Jets, and then they played at the Steelers, and not just at the Steelers, they also played at a rainstorm. It was pouring very heavily during that game, which is obviously going to depress any fantasy numbers that you could really contemplate. So that plays a role to their struggles potentially offensively in that game as well. They come home, and what's waiting for them is the defense of the Denver Broncos. So this game has a lot of intrigue to it. The first home game for one team, the first road game for a rookie quarterback. What is your take on the Denver Broncos as they travel to take on the Bengals?
Well, the Broncos defense, I think we all know that they're really, really good, but I don't know that we realize how good they are, like just how dominant they have been, because over their last 7 games, they've given up 20 or fewer points in 7 straight games, and that is despite facing the Panthers twice, the Patriots, the Steelers, the Chargers, the Bengals, and the Colts. I mean, those are the best offenses in the NFL. I mean, give or take a few, and they have just been beyond incredible. Von Miller enters this game with 10 sacks over his last 6 games. I'm worried that the Bengals will struggle to move the ball against the Broncos. The Bengals have become very predictable because they can't run the football at all. Their offensive line has been bad. I mean, they've allowed the most sacks in the NFL. And their offense is predictable because they're going to try to get the ball to A.J. Green. And, I mean, they were lucky enough to have Tyler Boyd step up and make some plays last week. But Gio Bernard got going in the fourth quarter of that game against Pittsburgh. But I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the Bengals being able to score against Denver. Now maybe Denver coming across the country for a 1 p.m. Eastern time game, maybe their defense won't show up as well early in the game, I suppose. But, just from a personnel standpoint, I think that the Bengals are going to have a tough time scoring points and moving the ball against this defense. I mean, they need to get Gio Bernard rolling early, I think, because they just straight up are not going to run the ball on the Broncos. And, hopefully they can use Gio Bernard and get him into space and, be able to create some plays on the ground like that. Even with A.J. Green, it's going to be difficult for him. The Broncos have they've given up just 1 wide receiver game of 50-plus yards through 2 games, and last year they allowed the fewest yards in the NFL to opposing wide receivers, and their secondary is the same. So I don't know, man. I don't think the Bengals are going to be able to do well offensively in this one.
And that's very well inside the realm of possibility. I'll throw a couple of counterpoints to that guess, and let's start with the fact that we knew, the Bengals historically have been very good inside when they play at home, right? I remember like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, like when you got to Andy Dalton and the Bengals at home, their red zone numbers were just very, very strong. They played 2 straight games on the road. They've gotten to the red zone 6 times against the Steelers and the Jets combined 6 times. They scored 1 touchdown. And part of the problem, obviously, this year, they don't have the wide receiving weapons they're used to, Mohamed Sanu, Tyler Eifert, and they don't have the dominant run game to really help them out. I don't think people realize, to be honest, Evan, I don't think people realize how helpful a run game is in the red zone. It's probably one of the most efficient ways to attack a defense in today's game right now, unless you have like a ridiculously athletic freak on the outside or like a Gronkowski. I mean, having a dominant run game in the red zone and spreading out a defense and just running on them is like humiliating and very effective. And they don't really have that right now. So that's a problem for them as well. And you're right, and you astutely mentioned, how great the Denver Broncos defense is. The interesting element here to me is Andy Dalton in this past game, because we do know, as you mentioned, that they've become very predictable. This is a team currently, we talked about in the years past, Hugh Jackson. This is the 4th most run-heavy team in the NFL. They quietly run the ball a ton. Like, a lot of people don't know about it. They talk about the Jets running the ball, a lot, the Bills, but the Bengals were close. I mean, obviously you got the Cowboys, but the Bengals are right behind those 3 teams. But So far this year, 2.8 yards per carry, only 32% of their runs have been graded as successful. That's third worst in the NFL. As a result, this team in the first half is 75% pass in their games. And, I mean, that's pretty astronomical. It's the most pass-heavy team in the NFL in the first half of games. They've just gone extremely, extremely one-dimensional passing the football. So, if they can protect Andy Dalton, then they are going to be aggressive through the air. If they can't protect Dalton, then they're kind of screwed either way, right? They're not going to be able to get much on the ground because the pass isn't able to open anything up. So I think it starts with their protection. And I admit, like you're right, they got to get a run game. They got to try to get it started. But the realist in me just doesn't really think that stands much of a chance. And they haven't seemed that committed to it either. And that was one of the big questions that I had coming into the season with this team. They lose Hugh Jackson, who, if you remember, was their running back coach before Jay Gruden left to go to the Redskins. He gets promoted. So the former running back coach suddenly turns the team a little bit more run-based. No real shocker there. But now Hugh leaves to go to Cleveland, and in comes Ken Zampese, who was their quarterback's coach. And, granted they're playing some teams with very good run defenses, but they've now become the most pass-heavy team in the NFL by a wide margin. I mean, the NFL average in the first half is 61% pass. The Redskins are the only other team above 70%, and they're at 71. And here the Bengals are at 75% pass through 2 games, obviously a smaller sample size there. But it would have been nice to be pass-heavy when they had more receiving options. They just don't have that right now. The interesting element here, though, to me about this game, I think that it could help dictate some things, is the negative perception and slant against the Denver Broncos offense. And we all know, I think, from like a DFS perspective, that player in us is thinking, well, C.J. Anderson, C.J. Anderson this week, is he a good match this week? We're looking for opportunities to play C.J. Anderson because we know that this team was surprisingly pass-heavy last year, 64% pass in 1-score games. That was the 6th most in the NFL. And they've obviously dialed it way back, as we kind of predicted, become a little bit more run-centric. But the reality is, by dialing it back, they've become less predictable in many situations, and it's actually helped out the quarterback tremendously. And what a lot of people do not realize is that the Broncos right now are the number 2 team in overall pass success rate across the field. 55% of their passes have been graded as successful. But if you take out the red zone where they've struggled, they have been successful on 62% of their pass attempts, which is the most in the NFL. Now, people, just to reiterate what a successful play is, successful plays, and I think this is going to catch on a little bit more. I know a lot of people use it already, but I think it's going to become more prevalent. Successful plays basically is a great efficiency metric. It basically throws out when you're getting excess yards. I think it's important to study chunk plays and big pass plays and run plays, but there's other ways to do that. We're going to talk in a minute about a game where the chunk plays spill into statistics a little bit too much and kind of distort some things from time to time. Success rate eliminates all that. Every single play is either 1 or 0, binomial. It's either successful or it is not. And on first and 10, you need to get 5 yards for it to be graded as successful. The NFL average is right around 5 yards per play on first downs. On second down, you have to gain 60% of the yards to go, and on third down, you have to get a first down. It's pretty straightforward. And they are the most successful passing team. The reason why people don't talk about them much, and rightfully so, I guess, Simeon, I think 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions. They run the ball a fair amount, and their defense helps them win games. So he doesn't have to do a whole lot. But when they do pass the ball, they're pretty successful. And I think that balance is what's really going to help them in this game. Balance between being able to gain yards running the ball and then being able to pass effectively. We saw John Elway and Gary Kubiak. Week 1, they just let this kid throw. Like, they threw him to the fire. He was throwing the football. Week 1, they didn't really hold him back or rein him in. It's his first road start. I feel like they're not going to do that here. I think they're going to let him throw the ball and let the offense be balanced. Obviously they're not going to go crazy passing the ball, but I do think that they're going to be pretty balanced. So I think this game is going to be pretty interesting. I'm interested to see what the Cincinnati Bengals offense and Andy Dalton, is he going to be able to elude the pass rush? And if so, there could potentially be some plays there in the passing game. Just with Denver having such a good pass rush, it's going to be difficult. But if he can do that, he's going to be throwing the ball enough. I think there'll be enough volume there to generate some things in the passing game. It's really a matter of whether these two teams who have gone 3 of 12 inside the red zone year to date will be able to convert when they can get down there. And I just mentioned how bad Denver was inside the red zone. Simeon's ratings are pretty poor as well. So both these teams need to improve upon that. But this game should be one of the most fascinating games. Both these teams obviously were favorites to return to the playoffs, this upcoming season. So I'm really excited.
Hey, let me ask you about I read about these like bettors narratives, like when a team starts their season out back-to-back road games and then they return home, they have they're bad against the spread. I mean, what do you think about those narratives like that?
There are certain spots when teams sometimes do tend to perform better than others, but trends in general like that, broad sweeping trends are sometimes the team might be in a bad situation, so to speak, but they can still perform well or exceed their expectations. That particular one where a team has been away for the past 2 weeks, I'll look up what the trend that you're speaking about is, and I'm running my model right now. They've gone. These teams apparently they're on average favored by 3.5 points, which is basically what the Bengals are favored by right now, 3.5, and they're 37-37 straight up, but they're 24-46 against the spread, and the total is perfectly split. Half the games have gone over, half the games have gone under. So you look at something like that. It's basically telling you this is a coin flip. They are not good against the spread, obviously, and some of these teams are favored by more than the 3.5 points, of course. So I'm looking at some of the recent results, and certainly since like 2007, the results have been even worse for these teams. So it's something to pay slight consideration to, but I think you and I are similar in the sense that I value matchups over just random stats that involve completely different teams. Some of these teams could be like the Oakland Raiders coming home and playing the Jets. That's in this model. Some of the teams are the Redskins playing the Bengals. That's in this model. So there's a number of teams that maybe like performed well on the road and aren't so great, or maybe performed well on the road, now come back home, are favored at home, and then they end up playing terrible because they had a win last week or something. That's not true for the Bengals. The Bengals actually lost they won week 1, but they probably should have lost that game. Somehow they were sacked 7 times and still won that game. They go to Pittsburgh, they lose that game. I don't think many people are really high on the Bengals this week from a sports betting perspective. We saw where the line opened, and some sharp money might be hitting the Bengals towards like a higher point spread, but the general public is not doing that. They're either, for the most part, the action is somewhat balanced, if not leaning a little bit with the Denver Broncos here. So, because who are 2-0 and who have looked a lot better in those 2 wins, especially last week against the Indianapolis Colts, than did the Cincinnati Bengals in the rain at Pittsburgh.
Well, I thought it was interesting to bring up because we have a couple of teams in that spot where they started out with back-to-back road games and now they're going home. Green Bay is another one.
Yeah, exactly. Green Bay is another one, and I think that matters a lot because you and I discussed on our call before we started recording this how great Aaron Rodgers is typically and historically at home.
Yeah, and I can't even remember if we decided to discuss this game, but we may as well because there are some interesting injuries really on both sides. I mean, last week we saw Sam Bradford and Stephon Diggs just straight take a blowtorch to the Packers defense, which historically has been really good actually against the pass under Dom Capers. In the previous 2 years, they were number 6 and number 11 in the NFL in pass defense DVOA, but the Packers did not have Sam Shields, their top corner, and with Stephon Diggs, the Vikings were really, really, really able to exploit that. And now that Matthew Stafford and Marvin Jones may be in a similar sort of situation, and the Packers have a lot of inexperience at inside linebacker, where they are starting a 4th-round rookie Blake Martinez and a second-year player Jake Ryan, who has been okay in the first couple of games, but was horrible in coverage last year and barely won a starting job. I mean, that's a weakness for Green Bay. And Detroit, their feature back right now is going to be Theo Riddick, who, I mean, when Theo Riddick's in there, you're trying to get him matched up against those inside linebackers. And Eric Ebron has started to become a major factor. He scored in the first game. He should have scored in the second game, but he had it pulled off by a bad offensive pass interference penalty. And then for Detroit, Ziggy Ansah, who's their only outside pass rusher, and he's a dominant guy. I think he had like 15 sacks or something silly last year. He will not play due to a high ankle sprain, and also DeAndre Levy, who is kind of considered to be their best linebacker. So some interesting injury angles there, and just the rhetoric all week on Green Bay, and for good reason, has been that they have looked bad on offense. And I mean, there are bad stats dating back to last year. You'll find those all over the internet. But I'm really interested to see if this can be a get right spot for them, because the Lions, I mean, in week 1, Andrew Luck just straight shredded them. You remember we were talking about that, and that was when they had Ziggy Ansah, and they were not able to get any pressure with their front four. And I think that Aaron Rodgers comes out and has a better game than people think, and I think that he, for just in terms of DFS, I think he'll have very low ownership, and I think that he's got a 4 TD sort of ceiling. I'm not saying I wouldn't project him for 4 TDs. I might project him for 2.3, but I think he's got a 4 TD sort of ceiling in this game. I think that the Lions are not an imposing matchup for for the Packers at all. And I think that the Lions should be able to score points on Green Bay as well.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, interestingly enough, when I first looked at this game and I first saw these two teams matching up, and I was initially drawn to the high total and the high spread. And I was like, you know, Detroit in the under here. I still do lean a little bit to Detroit, but the reality is, what do we know about the Detroit Lions and Matt Stafford? They don't always play that well on the road. They're going outdoors. It's actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of 3 outdoor road games for them. Remember, they played on the road in Indy week 1. They played at home, obviously, week 2. So they don't have very many outdoor road games this upcoming season. And so that was something that was interesting. But I will tell you this, you know, just talking about how good Aaron Rodgers has historically played at home. And I was a guy, I heard the narrative all off season from Colin Cowherd to a lot of other people in the media about how Aaron Rodgers was terrible, how he can't win the big games, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the reality is he was leading the NFL in passer rating up until week 7 when he comes off the bye and goes to Denver. And Denver's defense completely crushed him, smashed him, bashed him, destroyed him. He was hit, knocked down a million different times, sacked a number of times. They lost that game and it wasn't close. And he didn't ever look right after that point. And suddenly people started blaming he doesn't have his wide receivers and all this and that. And obviously he had off-season knee surgery. But the reality is, like, he was playing fine with the terrible receivers, so to speak, that he had to start the year. It's just after that particular game when he got crushed, and then obviously he played Carolina the following week with another physical defense. But to not delay the point anymore, if you look back at this game, a lot of people will not realize this when you look at the game last week between the Detroit Lions and the Tennessee Titans, because we all saw Detroit pretty much dominate that game, and Tennessee comes back for that late score at the end to win the game outright. But if you look at what we're talking about Marcus Mariota on the road against this Detroit Lions team, who was, obviously playing a little bit better defense at home than they probably will be on the road, and obviously they have lost a number of players in that second half to injury that they won't have this week. But in that second half, Marcus Mariota, their passing rate overall, their successful play rate on offense was 60% overall. When they passed the ball, 58%. When they ran the ball, 64%. That was their success rate for the Tennessee Titans in that second half. Marcus Mariota, over the course of the entire game, had a 93 passer rating. So a lot of people don't even think about that because they didn't put up very many points. But he was very efficient. And in the second half alone, Marcus Mariota, a 114 passer rating, 58% of all of his pass attempts were graded as successful. He had 19 completions, 79% completion rate, 8.3 yards per attempt. And this is on the road, with his number one target being Tajay Sharp, the rookie. He was throwing the ball to his running back, DeMarco Murray. I mean, Aaron Rodgers at home against the same defense, you're absolutely right, should have every opportunity to perform extremely well in this spot. And I, for one, would love to see him do that because
I would too. I'm rooting for him, man.
Exactly. I kind of am too. Like I also love bucking the narratives. Like I like going against the grain. And when everybody's bashing on a guy, I'll do some research to find out if there's any truth to the matter or not. And in this particular case, I would love to see him come back and have a very good game this week. Speaking of that game, I was kind of teasing and foreshadowing a little bit where the stats don't always make up exactly, how a game really is playing out. Let's shift to one of the games that is expected to be a blowout, and let's talk about the surprising and completely dominant rushing attack of the Cleveland Browns. This is a team who is averaging over 6 yards per attempt. It is the second best rushing offense in the NFL right now on a yards per attempt basis. And they have gone up against the Baltimore Ravens, and they completely destroyed them in terms of their rushing average. They also played the Philadelphia Eagles, and they had a great rushing game in that game as well. Unfortunately, this is the problem for the Cleveland Browns. They rank dead last in rushing success rate. It seems like a complete contradiction because they're averaging 6 yards per attempt, which is second best in the NFL, but they have the least success rate. And here's the reason. This is a team that has gains of 85 yards, 20 yards, 20 yards, 17 yards, and 16 yards, all on first down. They have a great success rate overall, 50% on first down. The problem is that on every single other down, only one of their 18 handoffs has graded successfully. Again, the definition of successful changes based on down and distance to go. But the fact of the matter is this is a team that has been fortunate to bust out a couple of big rushes, sometimes when they're trailing, other times when they have a lead like they did against the Baltimore Ravens, and they get a ton of yardage, so it's kind of skewing their overall rushing statistics. This is a team now with starting Cody Kessler who needs rushing support, not just on first down. Yeah, we'd love to have a 20-yard gain on first down. We need somebody who's going to be there when I throw an incompletion on first down or when I'm faced with 3rd and 5. or 3rd and 3 to get a first down and keep the chains going. And this run game has not been there in those types of situations. And the pressure is going to fall onto him. That's why I think this is a very interesting spot, because a lot of people look at those rushing yards and they think that this is a great rushing offense. And the reality is it has been extremely inefficient. They're going down after blowing a game that they should have probably won against the Baltimore Ravens. They did play very well. I was on Cleveland +6 in that game, and obviously they lost by only 5, so we covered. But now they're going to play Miami, who couldn't have had a worse draw to start the season of any team. You have Adam Gase, a lot of hype. You have to go to Seattle, come back to Miami, go to New England. I mean, it's an absolutely brutal first 2 weeks of the season. Now they finally get to come home against Cleveland. What is your take on this battle of the two AFC behemoths that nobody seems to want to talk about?
The dominant Cleveland rushing attack. So I've watched both of the Browns games. Okay, Isaiah Crowell in the first game, I think he finished with 12 for 62 and a touchdown, and he got 40 of those 62 rushing yards on the final 3 plays of the game out of the shotgun in a 29-14 loss, I believe it was. 40 of his rushing yards. Okay, and he finished with 62. In the second game, he had, the Browns just, it was like a mistake by the Ravens, and there was just a gaping hole, and Isaiah Crowell ran straight through it, and he was essentially untouched. I think one safety dove at him and kind of grazed his leg, so it wasn't technically untouched, but it was essentially untouched, and it was an 85-yard touchdown run. And besides those final 3 carries, obviously meaningless carries at the end of the Browns' Week 1 blowout loss, and the 85-yard untouched touchdown run, Isaiah Crowell has 60 yards on 26 carries, which is more representative of how the Browns' running game actually has been. And the Browns' running game is going to get even worse because they just lost their starting center, and now they have Cody Kessler at quarterback, who every defensive coordinator that they face is going to game plan to, we will definitely give you opportunities to throw against our defense. You're certainly not going to run the ball against our defense. Come throw it to our defensive backs. I love this spot for Miami. On defense, I think that in daily fantasy, the Miami defense is a really good play. And I think that Ryan Tannehill is a fantastic play. In Week 1, Carson Wentz, in his first ever NFL start after playing at Division I AA and playing 30 preseason snaps, he was the number 13 overall fantasy quarterback out of 32. So he was a top 3rd fantasy quarterback against the Browns in Week 1. Joe Flacco was, he was very productive last week. He had over 300 yards. He had 2 touchdowns against the Browns. And one thing that I did before the season is I went back and I looked at, over the past 3 years, what are some predictive characteristics of quarterbacks who have monster games? And one of them was that their team just won the game. So, their team was outscoring their opponent. That really should just be logical. The team, and I think that the Dolphins are going to outscore the Browns. The quarterback tended to play at home. So Ryan Tannehill checks this box. The quarterback tended to be very efficient and be playing a bad defense. Ryan Tannehill checks that box. And then if you look at this situation, so the Dolphins don't have Arian Foster and they don't have a running game, period. They just straight up cannot run the football. They start 4 left tackles on the offensive line. They do not have Mike Pouncey. They've not been able to run the ball. They're not going to be able to run the ball all season long. So even late in the game, they're not going to have LeGarrette Blount to give the ball to kill the clock. They're going to need to keep throwing it to Jarvis Landry in the fourth quarter. Additionally, Ryan Tannehill leads the Dolphins in rushing right now. He had 6 carries for 35 yards in the last game, and at Seattle in Week 1, he had 5 rushes for 17 yards and a touchdown. So that will supplement his fantasy outlook. Just the fact that Adam Gase is using him to run the ball. And then the addition of Devontae Parker is huge for the entire offense. Rich Rebar, who writes for RotoWorld, has shown that Jarvis Landry is actually more productive when Devontae Parker is on the field over a 7-game sample size since Devontae Parker broke into the lineup in Week 12 last year. just Devontae Parker just straight up helps make players better around him. And I think that Ryan Tannehill crushes it against Cleveland this week.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that logic. I mean, it's hard to expect that Ryan Tannehill would not have a decent game. Look, he obviously started off very poorly on that first half of the game up in New England, but then, maybe the New England defense let up a little bit. Whatever the case may be, the fact that they got things generated there in that second half and got that offense rolling a little bit, and the other cool thing about what he was doing in that game later on was he was down by so much that he was getting a lot more aggressive with the passing of the ball. He was getting a lot more aggressive with his play calls and throws and things of that nature, and they were having success when they did that, and that's only going to build up his confidence, I think, for the long term. And if you look at Cleveland right now, this defense, obviously we know that they've played Joe Flacco, who nobody's really going to, at home you play Joe Flacco. Nobody really thinks Joe Flacco is elite. I mean, except if you're Jim Harbaugh, John Harbaugh. Nobody really thinks that he's elite, probably, who's living and somewhat knowledgeable about the NFL. And then, of course, they play the rookie week one for Philadelphia Eagles, Carson Wentz. But this team right now, on short passes within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage, is allowing a 59% completion rate, and 46% of those pass plays have been successful. I think he will have a lot of success in this particular matchup, and I think that's all that really needs to be said. I agree with your take on Tannehill and DFS. Moving along to a team that is going onto the road, playing an early start time, and that is the Arizona Cardinals against the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo is going to be facing an opponent who is used to playing out west, is coming out east, and I'm looking forward to hearing the stats that you have on this one. But one of the interesting things about the Bills is we just mentioned, we mentioned this earlier on the podcast, I think, or we did it last week on the podcast, the firing of the offensive coordinator, and now they're left with the running backs coach. And the running backs coach obviously is going to be more inclined to call run plays, and that's going to be obviously very difficult for a team that is so run-based and so run-heavy that there's really no sense for them to run the football more. They need to be passing the ball more. Now, I agree Greg Roman wasn't calling enough pass plays to begin with, but now you bring in the running backs coach to run the ball even more potentially. And I don't know, it just seems like a very difficult situation for the coaching staff there to be doing things like that, for Ryan, Rex, and Rob to be getting involved and messing around with the offense and blaming them. I don't know. We need to go and rehash that discussion that we had, I think, on this podcast last week. But the bottom line is the Bills' offense could be in trouble without Sammy Watkins. What is your take on this game? Because definitely there's some opinions out there that Buffalo could potentially be a side here with Arizona being the road favorite. What is your take on the way that this game will play out from a daily fantasy perspective?
Yeah, what do you think about the reverse line movement on this game? I mean, what does that kind of tell you, Warren?
Well, in general, what I can tell you for a lot of people out there, just kind of educational, just simply trusting the screen, which is the betting screen that you're looking at, is not always the best strategy to take because sometimes games do get set up and that sort of thing. But in this particular case,
explain what that means. Games get set up.
Yeah. So for example, I don't think it's going to happen in this game, but let's say they wanted to lay Arizona -3. Okay. Normally you wouldn't do that when the public is already on Arizona. You're not going to try to set this game up because the public is going to drive the action in that direction. It's going to be harder for you to get the line to where you want it to go. It'd be easier for you to, let's say, start off the week betting Arizona, and let's say you love Buffalo. You could bet Arizona up to -7 from 5.5 or as high as 6, and then come in heavy on the dog and take Buffalo. And that's when you're setting a game up. Sometimes totals happen that way where some of the sharp groups, it's easier to move numbers earlier in the week. The limits are lower, and it doesn't take as much to move a number a half point or a point. And so you can bet the same amount then as you will on a Saturday night or Sunday morning, and you'll move the line in one case early in the week, and it won't even be a drop in the bucket when you're doing that on a Sunday morning. You have to bet significantly more to get any type of line movement on like a Sunday morning. So
they could come in like on, I don't know, Wednesday afternoon, place like a $10,000 bet and then come back on Sunday morning or Saturday night or whatever with like a $400,000 bet the other way.
Exactly. I mean, the goal with setting games up is
like there will be like DFS analysts that are looking at this stuff on like Tuesday or Wednesday, and they're like, oh, the line moved. Like I would be careful about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are certain things that you're going to get from this podcast because Evan knows the players and personnel really well from a daily fantasy perspective, and we love talking about football, and I can give you some insight into what some of the largest groups out there are doing in terms of having access that not very many people have to that type of information. And this type of thing does happen a fair amount. I don't want to say like 50% of the time or throw out any type of percentage, but there are often games that will get set up for certain reasons one way or another. And the key is understanding which games are real, which games are being set up. It happens often in college football and that type of thing, but it does happen in the NFL as well. In this particular case, we don't see that. If you want to talk strictly about, numbers and the way that they're trending, the other good thing that you can do is on that link that we just mentioned at sharpfootballanalysis.com, you can go to the lines page and you can click on the specific number to look at the line history. So if you want to look at the numbers, for instance, for this particular game at Pinnacle, okay, this game opened up at 5.5. You can look down at the history there, and you can see where it moved. It moved from 5.5 to 5, then down to 4, then down to 3.5. So there has not yet been any type of movement other than sharp one-way action towards the Buffalo Bills, even though the public is coming heavily in terms of bet percentages on the Arizona Cardinals. So this line is being dropped down by the sharps to a lower number. Once it gets to 3, you can expect to see some opposition there from groups that didn't agree with the initial Buffalo Bills side, and now they can lay Arizona -3. So there might be a little bit of resistance when you get to a key number like that. But so far, this is definitely a very infamous sharp versus square side on the board right here.
Right, because you have a West Coast team traveling all the way to the East Coast for a 1 p.m. Eastern time game where the home team has been written off, et cetera. But from a matchup standpoint, this is a really bad spot for the Bills, though. They are not going to have Sammy Watkins, and that's going to make their offense really, really easy to defend. Really easy to defend. And if you look at the way that the Jets attacked successfully the Buffalo defense last week, they were throwing vertical shots with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I mean, Ryan Fitzpatrick really isn't a vertical thrower, but he was crushing them he completed 10 passes of 15-plus yards, which is the third most in any NFL game over the past decade. I mean, and how does the Bruce Arians offense play? He comes from the Air Coryell background. They throw the football down the field. I mean, Rex has got to be worried right now because his cornerbacks they just got torched in the last game. That game happened in Buffalo too. I think that Rex is going to have to put some guys back to help his DBs, and I think David Johnson just eats up this Bills defense. I think David Johnson is an incredible play this week. I think that people are not really on him. They're looking for cheap running backs. If they're going to pay up, they're going to use D'Angelo Williams. I think that we see a really, really big game from David Johnson this week. And so he's the guy that really stands out for me on the Arizona side. And I like the Arizona defense too, because with no Sammy Watkins, I don't know how they're going to generate offense. I think that's going to be a big issue, especially with this new goofball play caller, Anthony Lynn, a career running backs coach. I mean, he is not going to fix anything. I can assure you that he won't fix anything.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, right now they are the third most run-heavy team in the NFL. Now they have their running backs coach, and they're going up against Arizona, who's the sixth most pass-heavy team in the NFL, who has operated thus far this year as the eighth fastest team overall compared to the Bills, who are 27 in that metric. It's really going to be incumbent upon this team to be able to generate a pass rush against the Arizona Cardinals defense. Against their offensive line. It's going to be very difficult, but they have to figure out some type of way to rattle Carson Palmer, because we have seen last week when the Buffalo Bills were allowing, as you mentioned, Ryan Fitzpatrick to hit some of these deeper targets that we're usually accustomed to seeing Ryan Fitzpatrick hit with a high amount of success in that particular game. That is definitely scary. And when you got the Arizona Cardinals, who are actually capable of converting inside the red zone as well, they're doing a little bit better job so far this year in that respect. They're actually the number one team in the NFL right now by my metrics in terms of their conversion rates inside the red zone. It's going to be difficult for the Buffalo Bills to keep up. So this is a game, though, that I'm probably staying away from a betting perspective this week. I didn't get involved at the early numbers where there was a little bit more value potentially. if you could have taken the 5.5 and grabbed a cheaper 6, that might have been the way to go here if you like the Bills. We're sort of in this, we're talking earlier about some dead numbers as we're running through like the 5 and the 5.5 down to this, 3.5, 4 range. So I didn't really do anything with that game personally. But let's move on to another game that may not have that shock appeal, that excitement factor involved in this game, because we just saw a very low-scoring game from this team last week. But I think there's some interesting storylines and a couple of interesting plays in this game that you're going to talk about. And that's the San Francisco 49ers traveling to take on the Seattle Seahawks. And we just saw San Francisco 49ers seemingly have some offensive performance, putting up some points in Carolina against the Carolina Panthers. But the reality of that game was they were very inefficient when they were scoring those points. They actually ranked 26th in first down, 27th in early down success rate. They were ranked dead last in completion rate, completing only 47% of their passes. Their passer rating at 64 was the third worst. They had the third worst yards per carry at 2.5 yards per carry, and they had the sixth worst yards per play of any team last week, and they had the fourth worst time of possession, which is not something surprising for a Chip Kelly coach team. But this is just a very overall poor performance. Yet they were in this game seemingly somewhat close at various points, like right after halftime, and that was in large part due to 4 turnovers that the Carolina Panthers had in what was kind of a sloppy game for them offensively. Eventually, Cam was able to put up the points, and they scored 46 on the 49ers. But what is your take in terms of some interesting plays here that may offer some value, because people really have been selling Seattle right now without very much confidence in this team at all, with their low point scores and just their overall inefficient play. I think it could be like a buy low opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the 49ers just straight up suck. They're freaking horrible. Their running backs have combined to average 2.89 yards per carry through 2 games. Their offensive line is just getting smashed. I mean, Pro Football Focus has their center dead last out of all centers. Their left guard, Zane Beadles, is number 66 out of 69 guards. Their right guard is number 42 out of 69 guards. Their right tackle, Trent Brown, is number 57 among 66 tackles. They're second from last in the NFL in yards per play. The only team with worse yards per play is the Rams, who the 49ers beat in Week 1. Blaine Gabbert is 34th in the NFL in yards per attempt. He's 33rd in passer rating. I mean, they are straight up horrible. And I don't know if the Seahawks offense right now is quite functional enough to put up a really big score, but I expect them to have offensive success. The 49ers, since the start of the 2015 season, have given up 33 points per game on average in 9 road games, whereas they've only given up 15 points in 9 home games over that same stretch. I mean, the 49ers do not like to play in front of crowds, and the CenturyLink Field is going to be quite crowded and loud, and this is an absolute perfect spot with Thomas Rawls doubtful, and CJ Prosise maybe not even being a factor. He didn't play last week, and it looks like he might have a club on his hand. This is a situation where Christine Michael could play almost every snap in the Seahawks offense against a horrible team in a game where the Seahawks defense should just straight up dominate, and you use Christine Michael and you use the Seahawks defense and you put them together and they give you a ton of points. We did this last year with Chris Ivory and the Jets defense against the Browns. I want to say that was in Week 1. And we did this with Todd Gurley and the Rams defense against the Browns in Week 7 to a lot of success. And I think that this is a situation where you use Christine Michael because he is going to get, I think he has like a floor of 18 carries and he could get upwards of 30 if the game goes like it should go. And I fully expect it to. Love that pairing in fantasy, Christine Michael plus the Seahawks defense. By the way, I've gotten a lot of questions about Christine Michael and his offensive line, which I agree is not good, but Christine Michael is good. And, you can watch him play and you can tell that. And he's averaging 5 yards per carry without any truly long runs to kind of like spike or skew that average. So is the offensive line great? No, but it certainly hasn't seemed to affect Christine Michael's rushing efficiency so far.
Yeah, and one other thing of the offensive line, I mean, we've talked about this before, but if that offensive line cannot protect well enough, and we know that Seattle's offensive line struggles, not that San Francisco's defensive line has been tremendous at applying pressure, but, there's even more reason why you might want to lean on the run until you can figure out some things along that offensive line from a pass protection standpoint. So there are some benefits there to just calling a decent run game and having some balance. Russell Wilson, what is your take on his overall health at the current moment? How healthy do you think he actually is back there?
I think he's okay. I don't think that he's at 100% mobility. I don't think he's going to throw a lot in this game. I don't think we're going to see him dropping back a lot. I think that we're going to see a lot of Christine Michael. Pete Carroll came out just a few hours ago. We're recording this on Friday night, but just a few hours ago, Pete Carroll came out and said, I think Christine Michael's ready. He's ready to have a 20-something carry game. I mean, they're going to put it in this dude's belly. He was the best player in their offense last week. I know that people don't want to like to admit that Christian Michael. I mean, people have like an issue with Christian Michael, and I mean, I sort of get it because he's been like a multi-year underachiever. But he's ready, man. I mean, he had 13 touches for 86 yards last week. It's going to happen this week.
Well, let's see how that goes. I mean, I certainly think that, like you mentioned, one of the biggest indicators or markers for success for running backs in daily fantasy, I believe, is just the opportunities. And he's definitely in a positive situation from that perspective where he is expected to be playing on a team that is expected to be winning this game, going up against an opponent who is expected to run a lot of plays very quickly. And when that typically happens, as we mentioned, that team ends up being off the field very quickly as well when they're as inefficient as the San Francisco 49ers historically have been. I just told you what numbers they produced week one, a very inefficient day for them. And that means that there should be time and opportunity for the Seattle Seahawks to have a lot of run plays if they so desire in this particular game. So I won't disagree one bit with that take. Let's move along to a 4 p.m. game, actually 4:25 Eastern, and this will be the last game that we'll kind of close with here. And this is the battle between the New York Jets and the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, both of these teams obviously have playoff aspirations, playoff hopes. The Chiefs, I think, thought that they could potentially be set up to win the AFC West, and a lot of people may have been picking the Oakland Raiders as like the dark horse team to emerge from this division, and here the Denver Broncos are not going away anytime soon. So the Kansas City Chiefs really need this game, and on the contrary, the Jets, I can't say how much it probably pains them to have watched Jacoby Brissett win that game against the Houston Texans. It seems like Brady's going to be coming back, and this team is staring at 3-1 or 4-0 right in the face. And the Jets are gaining no ground at all here. So they really need this win to keep up pace in that division. So here's what it comes down to: a battle between two teams that were close last year, didn't really get the job done, what they hope to do, hope that they're going to be better this year. But they both have some significant deficiencies, surprisingly enough, on the defensive end. We usually expect both these defenses to be very sound, and maybe it's due to a little bit of age on the case of the Jets, as well as a little bit of personnel loss via injury, as well as free agency for the case of the Chiefs. But both of these defenses have not quite been up to par, at least particularly on the back end, and potentially a little bit with the pass rush there as well for the Chiefs, to really slow down opposing offenses as much as they should. What is your take on this game? It's got a somewhat of a low total, and the Chiefs right now are favored by 3.
Yeah, and it opened at 44, and I mean, there's obviously been money on the under because it's down to 42 in a lot of places. And as you would say, it passed through a key number, right? It passed through 43.
Yeah, 43 is definitely a key number in total. So it did. I see at Westgate it opened at 43 and it's down to 42, but absolutely at Pinnacle and at Chris it opened above the 43, has passed through the 43. I have some definite concerns about the way that I think this game could go over, because if it's against most teams, if it's the Jets versus most teams, or potentially the Chiefs versus most teams, I think we could see some points here. The problem becomes when the Chiefs have the ball and they're playing the Jets, and this is the reason why I'll say it like this, because the way to beat the Jets, as we've seen, and you're going to throw a good counterpoint to this in a minute, I know, but the way that we've seen a lot of teams beat the Jets this year, or at least put up points against them, has been through the deep pass, attacking that secondary, stretching them out down the field. And we saw that in week 1. We saw Andy Dalton do that. We saw Andy Dalton get stacked on his butt 7 different times, yet he had like a 77% completion rate and I think like a 111 passer rating in that game, because he completed 22 of 30 pass attempts when he was capable of getting the ball off. And he was able to do some damage with the ball when he was able to get it off. He was going deep down the field and striking deep. You got Tyrod Taylor for the Buffalo Bills the very next week on a short week, and that offense didn't do a whole lot except for get some big chunk plays in the pass game, and they were able to put up some points that way. And I look at a team like Alex Smith-led Kansas City Chiefs. You know, Andy Dalton against the Jets averaged 38 yards per attempt on passes 15 or more yards in the air. Tyrod Taylor averaged 22 yards per attempt on passes 15 or more yards in the air. Alex Smith so far this season, when the game is within one score and it's not in garbage time in the fourth quarter, he has only attempted 3 passes of 15 or more yards in the air, and he's 0 of 3 on those pass attempts. He is not very accurate throwing the ball deep down the field, and that's why Andy Reid and just his conservative nature in general, trying to win with defense usually, they do not really attack the opponent deep down the field except when absolutely necessary. Week 1 against the Chargers, they got way behind. They were throwing it more deep in the second half. Week 2, they were down by 10 after the second quarter and third quarter against Houston. They were throwing it a little bit deeper down the field. But if this game is close at all, or if the Chiefs are actually winning this game a little bit, it's kind of unlikely, in my opinion, that they're going to attack the weakness of the Jets, which is in their secondary, and especially on these deep chunk plays. And the problem comes if you're using a short passing game and you're trying to run the ball and stay very balanced in that format, keeping everything kind of in front of the Jets' defense where their real trouble is. It's harder to convert first down after first down after first down and maintain like a 70-yard drive to score a touchdown in that manner, because this is a very good defense, and they'll force you to make a mistake. They'll force you to get rid of the ball quickly. They'll force you to keep converting third downs, and it's hard to do that. The way you beat a team like the Jets or a team like the Seahawks or any of these teams with great defenses is chunk plays in the passing game. It doesn't mean necessarily bombs way down the field, but you have to get those 20, 25-yard pass completions several times throughout the course of the game, and maybe they're able to do that, with the tight end Kelsey and maybe 1 or 2 to Macklin, but it is going to be a little bit more outside of their nature to have success doing that. I know you have an interesting take, though, on the Chiefs in this game and what they could do potentially, so go ahead and lay that out for us.
Well, I like this as an over game, and we can even start on the other side. I just don't think that the Chiefs' defense is as good as, people may think that it is, because they don't have Justin Houston, and their corners just aren't that good. I know Marcus Peters has a big name. He was the Rookie of the Year last year, but he gives up a ton of production, and he'll make some plays too. I mean, he'll catch a few for sure. I think he had 8 INTs last year, but he's not like a shutdown corner by any means. And the rest of their corners aren't very good. Last week they gave up 100 yards to Will Fuller and 7 catches for 113 to DeAndre Hopkins. And in week 1, they were getting smashed by Keenan Allen before he got hurt. He had 6 for 63 in a quarter and a half. And then they gave up two long completions to Tyrell Williams. He had gains of 38 and 33. So the Chiefs defense right now at this moment in time, especially with how explosive the Jets offense has looked, just not too worried about the Chiefs defense. And then I'm looking at the fact that you're right. Andy Dalton and Tyrod Taylor got a lot of their production off of deep shots. But I think that if Andy Reid has any sense, then he can do that too. I know that Alex Smith is not a deep ball thrower. I understand that. But I think that they can use the short passing game to kind of set up some shots off play action or whatever. They're not going to run the ball on the Jets. They just are not going to be able to run the ball on the Jets. The Jets have the best defensive line in the league. The Chiefs are missing 1 guard. I think it looks like they're going to get the other guard back. They were without 2 last week, and the running game has been pretty darn successful, even with some injuries on the offensive line. So that is a little bit promising. But ultimately, I think they will struggle to run the ball against the best defensive line in football, and they're going to have to move the ball via the pass. And Darrelle Revis, I don't think he can hang with Macklin. And I don't think that the Jets have enough personnel to really, really slow down Kelsey. And if the Chiefs are going to take some shots, they have a dude by the name of Chris Conley, who's 6'2" and 215 pounds, who runs 4.35 with a 45-inch vertical. So they can take a shot or two with him. I don't know. 42 seems too low to me, man. I think that this game, I don't know that it shoots out, but I think that it could be like 24-21 very, very easily, and like it wouldn't shock me if it went up to 27-24. I just think that both of these teams should be able to have success in the passing game in this game, and I think that Alex Smith is a little bit sneaky. He's going up against a defense that has already given up The quarterback 11 finish in week 1 in fantasy to Andy Dalton. The quarterback 5 finish to Tyrod Taylor in week 2. And I understand that they got those stats in maybe a different manner than Alex Smith usually plays. But ultimately, I think that Alex Smith's going to have to put the ball in the air in this game. And I think that for the most part, he should have success. That just nothing real imposing about the Jets' back 7 on defense. And I think that Revis is a real liability at this point.
Yeah, he has been. He has been shown to be a potential weak point where he had been, the strong point for that secondary for a number of years. Interestingly enough, I was just looking as you're talking about the potential for Ryan Fitzpatrick to kind of push the ball a little bit more down the field. And if that pass rush isn't there, one interesting element here, the player who has attempted the most passes of 15 or more yards in the air, the player is Jameis Winston. Obviously, he was trailing against the Arizona Cardinals last week in what ended up being a very poor call on my part to try to predict that he could have some semblance of success out there in Arizona. We were both definitely right on Palmer, carrying the load, and I thought Jameis might be able to trail with him there, but that did not happen. But the second guy on the list is actually Ryan Fitzpatrick, who has attempted 19 passes of 15 or more yards in the air, and on those 19 passes, he's actually completed 68% of them, which is an extremely high number given that volume. I mean, if you look at the other couple guys who have thrown 19 passes, 20 passes for Jameis has completed 20% of his passes 15 or more yards in the air. Blake Bortles also has thrown 19 attempts, and he's completed 42%. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is up at 68% completions on these deep passes. Andrew Luck's the only guy who's got 19. He's down at 47%. So the fact of the matter is here, they are pushing the ball deeper down the field, and they're having a lot of success doing so. But with that said, tell me a little bit about the Jets wide receivers. I know we have some health injuries with regard to Brandon Marshall. I think you're pretty confident in Eric Decker playing well. Do you think Marshall starts and plays, or what is his status based upon his injury, you think?
I do think that Marshall starts and plays. I think the Jets beat writers think that he will, but I think that this is an Eric Decker game. Eric Decker's playing 60% of his snaps at slot receiver, and Eric Decker's a big dude. I mean, he's 6'3", 215. He's going to take on in the slot for the Chiefs Steven Nelson, who is 5'9" and 190 pounds. So certainly from a size standpoint, Eric Decker has a big advantage there. And then Quincy Enunwa has become a major factor in the Jets offense. He plays a lot of slot. They will run him out of the H-back position, where he will actually line up in the backfield, and that's one way for them to get him matched up against linebackers. I mean, Shane Kelly is a really good OC. I know that people really soured on him when he was a head coach in Buffalo, but he's one of the most creative OCs in the NFL, and I think this is a legitimately good offense. I mean, they just have so many weapons. Matt Forte is pretty much rolling. Their offensive line has been at worst above average. I would say it's been darn good early in the year. I like the over in this game. We'll see how it goes. I know that when you look at it on a piece of paper and you see Jets Chiefs, you think, oh man, this is going to be a defensive slugfest. But I think both these teams will have passing success, and I think it's an interesting and underrated source of fantasy points this week.
Well, one of the big things, if you're not getting scores on big chunk plays, the way to get an over, the way to score points is efficiency inside of the red zone. And in order to have efficiency, you have to get down there. Unfortunately for both these teams, they have put themselves down in the opponent's red zone often. If you look at the Chiefs, Week 1, they went down there 5 times. They converted 4 against the Chargers. Week 1, the Jets went down there 5 times against the Bengals, and they converted 2. Now, Week 2, we know that the Texans really shut the Chiefs down a bit, and the Chiefs only made 2 trips to the red zone that time, didn't score a single touchdown. But the Jets got into the Bills' red zone 7 times and scored 4 touchdowns. So there definitely is it's potentially on the Jets side of things, the ability to make trips with their kind of higher flying pass game with an efficient run game to get down there into the red zone. And I think we've seen this, since last year or 2 years ago. Justin Houston went out for a few games back at the end of, I want to say it's like the 2014 season. And the Chiefs prior to him leaving were like one of the most strongest defensive teams in the entire NFL. And he goes out, and if you remember, that was the year, I think his score was like 45-42 in the playoffs where they went to play the Indianapolis Colts in the postseason, and it was just like absurd high score in that playoff game because they'll get down and they just have to turn to the pass and have to just play a little bit more wide open. And so I think the best case scenario, if you are playing fantasy guys in this game, even though it has a low total, is hope that the Jets pull out to some type of a lead here, because that will get the Chiefs to come out of their shell. They'll get them to push the ball down the field a little bit more. And that's a very realistic possibility in this game. I mean, they're only a 3-point underdog. There's been some sharp money coming in on the Jets. I think we're going to get a little bit of two-way action here. There's going to be some guys who come in on the Chiefs as well. But I think there's going to be a pretty competitive game. And you're right. I think once teams, if these guys can get down to the red zone, which I think that they will, it's about converting. I just worry about the Chiefs being able to take the over-the-top shots frequently enough. So that's the biggest thing I'm going to be focused on in this particular game. With that said, that kind of wraps up the game that we had on deck to talk about. Evan, are there any kind of last-minute tips or ideas for any particular value from any positions on the card this week that you just want to make sure the listeners get this in their head, before they're getting ready to make their lineups here, as we're going to be releasing this on Saturday morning?
Well, I would just say that Ezekiel Elliott in the Sunday night game is in an amazing, amazing spot, because the Bears lost 6 defensive starters, including their badass nose tackle, Eddie Goldman, and their stud inside linebacker, Danny Trevathan, both critical run stoppers. And they are going to be incredibly shorthanded on the road in Dallas on a short week. And Ezekiel Elliott has been, I would say, mildly disappointing so far. I would say the Cowboys' offensive line has actually been mildly disappointing so far, but I think that they get the ship righted on Sunday Night Football, and I think Zeke just straight up rolls over the Bears defense, and I think that he's an amazing daily fantasy play, along with David Johnson, who we talked about earlier, and Christine Michael. Those are my favorite 3 running back plays this week.
Excellent. Well, there are some definite guys there that you can build the team around, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, people have been looking for Zeke to kind of bust out and have a really productive game, and it really sets up well from an injury perspective, as well as playing at home as a favorite in this particular spot for him to have some success against this Bears defense, which, I mean, in many respects has exceeded expectations so far, and this line does seem a little bit high, like a little bit out of whack, but it really depends on how you factor in these injuries, because it's a little bit easier when you're replacing one guy, but then when you lose like a second guy, maybe the next week, then it gets a little bit more complicated. When you're losing a bunch of guys after one particular game, and you have to put a lot of new faces on there simultaneously who are used to playing spot roles and now have to play next to another guy who's used to playing spot roles, it's going to be a big adjustment for that defense, and certainly the huge hogs on the offensive line of the Dallas Cowboys are licking their chops and, eating a few extra chicken wings before this one to have enough energy to keep pancaking these guys left and right throughout the course of this game. So with that said, I'll go ahead and mention, guys, be sure to follow Evan on Twitter at Evan Silva. You can find all these great nuggets over the course of the entire week. You don't have to have them isolated to this podcast that we put on Saturday morning. Definitely stay in touch with him as he's posting and tweeting information all the time over at RotoWorld and on Twitter, of course. Follow me on Twitter at SharpFootball. And I encourage you guys, Monday night, we do this pregame show. It's a live Periscope, and I'm actually going to be taking calls on this show. And we're looking. The invitation is out there. Evan has accepted it, but hopefully it'll come through. We might be able to get Evan on this upcoming Monday night on the Sharp Football Show, which is an alternative pregame show, 8 p.m. till kickoff on Monday night. This is Eastern time, of course. Give you guys a little bit of some analytical taste of what you need to know, what you didn't see in the other pregame shows that you might want to be aware of heading into the upcoming week of games. So stay tuned to that on Periscope at 8 p.m. on Monday night, and hope you guys have a great time watching these games, and obviously you're going to have a great time when you set some great lineups and have success betting these games as well. So hope all of that goes very well for you. And until then, Evan, thanks again, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Up.